Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We are here to talk about chromodiversity during Chromodiversity Week. We're very, very excited about this. I have some wonderful, wonderful humans with me here today. I am your host, Catherine McCord, and I am very honored to be an ambassador with this group. But I'm going to let the gentleman that's over here to my right, if you're looking at the screen, Elliot, tell you a little bit more about the group that we're here with today, his company, his organization, and then everybody will do a quick 30-second introduction, then we'll dive in and tell you all about chromodiversity. Elliot, take it away.
Thank you so much, Kat, and thank you for hosting on your Super Mania Show, this first live event about that we're going to have a few events during Chromodiversity Celebration Month. This is the first one. We'll have another one in 2 weeks, which are about growing up with chromodiversity, the actual experience of what is it like to have a genetic variation, an extra chromosome, one chromosome less, or to have a different genetic configuration. And these are things that are actually much more common than most people know about. My own son was diagnosed 19 years ago, and that was before he was born. So when the doctor said, you have to come over, we found a genetic abnormality. I was really worried about it and thought, oh, this must be something rare and terrible. Turns out, no, it's not. It comes with strengths, it comes with vulnerabilities. But I wish I'd known or had met somebody with a difference like that. 1 in 400 people, it's thought, but only maybe 1 in 5,000 ever diagnosed. So Brock has an extra X. He's a mental health advocate. Amazing story to tell. Rick has an extra Y, 47th Y. Also, remarkable person. Stephen is an advocate for Klinefelter's extra Y. And Kate has a different type of genetic variation. So I'd really like to hear their story. It's time that we hear their voice. We've not heard their voice before very much.
I can't hear, so.
Okay, so
I can't hear the sound cut off.
Brock is right next to me on the screen, so I'll move to Brock. Hi, Brock. You're in Minnesota, is that right?
Hi, Elliot. Yep, I'm in Minnesota, in the United States, land of 10,000 lakes.
And you like to swim you like to swim in the lakes, don't you?
Yeah, grew up on a lake in northern Minnesota, and I was actually a competitive swimmer and played collegiate water polo as well.
That's cool.
When did you learn that you had an extra 47th chromosome? Most humans have a 46, but some people have 47, some people have 45, some people, it's rare, have 48. This is also the case I just learned today with cats. The cats that have an extra chromosome, and it means they're two colored. They're tabby cats with two different colors, which that look kind of cool. So when did you discover that?
Yeah, so I discovered my extra X, as I call it, which I've come to really enjoy, actually, after some period of kind of grief and mourning. But I found out during my infertility journey with my partner at the time, which is, I think, a way a lot of people find out. And so getting the genetic karyotype blood test back after discovering that I did not produce any sperm is when I found out about my extra X chromosome. I was 36 years old.
Wow, so that was a late in life diagnosis. That's cool. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. So Rick, what about you?
Okay, so I was 39 when I found out. Also, we were going through fertility treatment. Although I was producing sperm fine, but my wife and I were struggling to have a baby. What else do you want to know?
Just anything about you.
All right. Okay. So so my name's Rick Clark. I'm 46 now. I live in Edinburgh in Scotland in the United Kingdom. I've got ADHD. I'm autistic, and I also have dyspraxia. I think for many years, whilst these different, I got diagnosed with the ADHD when I was 36, the autism just 3 months ago. I still compete in track and field and cross country, and I love sport in general. I've always been a bit different to people. Some would say intense, weird, have particular interests that maybe not everyone else has. But
That's okay. Those are the
that's
coolest
okay.
people.
And I love all that stuff now. I embrace it wholeheartedly. So yeah.
I love it. And I love too that you brought up that neurodiversity is very often linked to chromodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
They are very often intersected. So let's talk about, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too. So Stephen, what about you?
I'm Stephen Malherbe. I'm in Cape Town, South Africa. I was diagnosed when I was 17 years old. My parents sensed there was something wrong because I have an older brother and he was much taller than I was. I was struggling at school. There was very little known about it, I think, in South Africa and the rest of the world. My mom, we went from doctor to doctor and eventually it was picked up and I was diagnosed. The doctor at the time made a mistake and only put me onto testosterone for a year until I went from 5'1" to 6'1", and felt that, well, since you've gone up to that jump, you don't need to have testosterone anymore. And when I moved, I grew up in Johannesburg. And when I moved from Johannesburg to Cape Town, I changed doctors. And my doctor said, have you ever been for a bone mass scan? And I said, no. And she said, well, I'm sending you for a scan. They found out I had the bone structure of a 70-year-old man, and I was 37. I've never been. So from 17 to 37, 20 years, I had no testosterone. So the bone building wasn't there. The muscle tone wasn't there. I'm also quite an active person. I did a lot of martial arts when I was younger. I've got a black belt in karate. I've done judo, jiu-jitsu. And
That's cool.
I broke a lot of bones and nobody could figure it out. They just said, well, maybe it was just an unlucky punch or whatever. Nobody connected the dots. So I represent South Africa with the Klinefelter syndrome, and that's where I am at the moment.
Very interesting. And we'll talk more about diagnosis and all that too. So Kate, last but certainly not least, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kate O'Brien, and I'm the ambassador for New Hampshire, United States. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a genetic defect of collagen, and it also affects every single organ in the body. So there is no one doctor to treat Ehlers-Danlos. The main symptoms are connective tissue hypermobility. I can overbend my arm and do all sorts of party tricks. And yeah, I've been getting out of handcuffs. Yep. And my son, who is 14, also has it. I'm sorry, 15. Oh, wow. And my mother, who is 80, also has it. I diagnosed myself in 2020. No, sorry. I'm also dyslexic. In 2013, and then was confirmed by a geneticist, as was the rest of my entire living bloodline. And to diagnose my 7-year-old son at the time was heartbreaking, but at least we could put into use different safeguards and things like that. And when I was young, I was a gymnast. I wasn't very good, but I was very enthusiastic and very flexible. And I would land on my head a lot doing back handsprings. And it was later discovered that I have also a genetic Chiari malformation, which is basically when the bottom of your brain falls out of your skull and into your spinal canal and compresses your brainstem. So I had a 7-hour surgery for that and am feeling much better. But I had to diagnose that too, because I went to more than 200 doctors and nobody had a clue. So I had to read brain scans and all that stuff. It's said that the occurrence of Ehlers-Danlos is about 1 in 5,000. It's either a rare disease or a rarely diagnosed disease. I think it's
possibly both.
Possibly both. Yes, absolutely. And the one positive is I don't wrinkle. So I turned 51 this month, and I really like that. So that's the best part of it.
That is not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing.
I always believe that there's pluses and minuses with everything. That's your positive, is no wrinkling.
Absolutely.
You'll be
Yes.
this gorgeous forever. That's what we're learning here today. So
Well,
I love.
certainly we want to celebrate difference, and our core value is celebration of diversity for more inclusive and robust societies. That doesn't mean that differences don't come with challenges, and they come, for instance, with neurodiversity challenges. One of the most underappreciated but important aspects for parents, for instance, who have children who have chromosome differences, are the emotional and social aspects of growing up with chromodiversity, which is actually the theme that we are focusing on this month. It's growing up. It's the early age aspects that have been very much neglected.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to also make sure to talk about, we were talking about, growing up with this and what this was like. So I think it's also really important to talk about being careful going through the diagnostic process and what that can be and what that can mean in terms of finding the right doctors, avoiding weird crackpot solutions, and being your own advocate. So I'm going to kind of go backwards on this one. Let's start with Kate and tell us a little bit, because I know you did a lot of self-advocacy. So tell us a little bit of kind of what that was like.
Well, one of the things I forgot to mention is that the Ehlers-Danlos brain is almost always accompanied by autism and ADHD and something under the umbrella of dyslexia, and also depression and anxiety. So, and are we focusing on mostly childhood?
It really would anything you've experienced, but mostly childhood, yes.
The biggest thing that I've experienced is people not believing me. Luckily, I have a 7-inch scar from my brain surgery, so I have some actual physical proof that I've gone through this journey. Otherwise, if you look at me, I appear perfectly healthy, but on the inside, if your connective tissue or any organ tissue looks like lasagna noodles, mine looks like angel hair pasta. And so we don't break, we bend, but it hurts. I can't even count how many sprained ankles and partially dislocated wrists I've dealt with. Most families have a bag of athletic, like a big box of baseballs and basketballs and hockey sticks. My son and I have a big box of braces. And it's my son is even on an adjusted schedule for school. He missed over 120 days of school his freshman year last year.
Wow.
So we're adjusting that to include online school for the mornings, so he can get up and stretch and have enough sleep. But the hardest part was nobody believed me. If a doctor doesn't know what's wrong, they're likely to say nothing's wrong.
Yes. That is so true. I see that all the time with what I do, and people being told that they're crazy. I've been told that, and then sure enough, years later, it's like, oh no, this is a total thing, and you have it. And good grief. I once had a doctor tell me that when I was literally having 45-minute long seizures, there's nothing wrong with you, and I went, I don't feel like that's correct.
Yeah.
I really don't think that that's right. So I also, we talked a little bit about the neurodiversity. So Rick, you touched on that as well, that you also have neurodiversity diagnoses as well, which is, I love neurodiversity. That's kind of my favorite thing in the whole wide world. But tell me how that has kind of affected you, and was that diagnosed simultaneously with the chromodiversity? Was it diagnosed separately? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, well, it all obviously happened later on in my life, so not in my childhood. I mean, as I have speaking to Elliot before, I've screwed up so many things in my life, made so many mistakes, went down lots of wrong paths, behaved very, badly, just couldn't get a handle on myself, etc., etc. Yet, as I say, I'm 46. When growing up in the UK, there was no the understanding about kids with ADHD back in the 80s was you had to be hyperactive. I wasn't particularly hyperactive, so I probably got missed for that reason. My mum cut out an article in a newspaper for me when I was 23, which I didn't get around to reading for 5 years. Now, why did I keep an article for 5 years? I don't know, except I used to kind of hoard everything because I never I had so little money that I used to keep everything that anyone ever gave me because I felt that I might maybe need it at some later date. And anyway, I read the article, and it basically was talking about the possibility or the incidence of ADHD in adults. But unfortunately, in the UK at that time, it wasn't considered to be an actual diagnosis. It was, you could get diagnosed as an adult in the US or in Australia, but in the UK, it just wasn't even a thing. And I tried to get a diagnosis. I kind of got laughed out of the room a couple of times. My doctor prescribed anti-anxiety medication for me because, well, he didn't really know what he was doing, and I kind of gave up on it. And as it happens, I've had loads and loads of therapy over the years for lots of different things because of all the mistakes I suppose I made, and perhaps because of the way that I had such poor executive function. And in the middle of getting some counseling at one point, I got referred to somebody after the diagnosis was an adult diagnosis and got my ADHD diagnosis. More recently, as I said, when we so that was when I was 36. When I was 39, going through the fertility treatment was when I got my XYY. The dyspraxia thing, I kind of actually during the whole lockdown period of COVID, I started to speak to more people just because we're almost like forced to because we weren't able to see people in the flesh.
Whole new world.
So I was speaking to more people virtually, and gosh, I mean, I met hundreds of people more in the last couple of years because of that, and I started to realize, but I hadn't been massively aware about this whole comorbidity of different types of diagnoses that can be comorbid or whatever. So the fact that somebody could have dyslexia and ADHD or autism and dyscalculia or whatever it happens to be.
It's actually very common. People don't realize that. It's very common. It's just like with autoimmune diseases. Typically, if you have one, you have multiple. It's the same kind of thing with neurodiversity. Typically, if you have one, there's something else there. They just kind of tend to come in groups. I
had made a kind of step forward to try to talk about neurodivergence in general on the internet as much as I could, on anything kind of social media that I might be posting, and so constantly tried to expand my network. And in the middle of that, I started to realize that perhaps that I might have something else. So that's where the dyspraxia came from. There was too many things that I read about it that actually it wasn't simply just about being not terribly coordinated. I write with both hands. I'm incredibly messy. I struggle to get ready in the morning. I struggle to get ready for bed at night. Anyway, even if that, as it may, it's not really that important. The autism thing took a little bit longer. I had to get my doctor's referral and eventually got a diagnosis just very recently. And that was a very thorough thing. I'm actually going through a late diagnosed assessment group at the moment. Oh, not assessment group, a late diagnosed group where I suppose it's like a support group where we're getting to know more about our autism, which is absolutely terrific. Actually, I'm loving learning about myself, about things that I never realized were related to that.
It's a cool process, isn't it? It's like you just kind of, it's a new way to understand yourself and to kind of be able to figure out more things and more tricks and more ways to better work with yourself. And I want to.
The other thing is that I think a lot of people see it negatively, and I want to try to shine a light or try to change the conversation to look at the positives about those kind of things, and in all kind of things, and also not to use it as a crutch, because I think that can be dangerous,
Absolutely.
Because then people blame you for things or get annoyed with you or think that you're making excuses for yourself.
Well, and I do tell people all the time, different is not a deficit. It's not just because you're different does not mean that there's something inherently wrong. Now, Brock, I wanted to ask you too. So, how, when you were growing up before you had a diagnosis, were there things that you noticed? Were there things that you experienced? And since you didn't have an answer, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. Immediately when I was a kid, I knew that something was off and something was wrong with how I processed just life in general. I always talked about life the world was so gray, and I didn't understand why it was just, I wasn't able to perceive concepts like my other childhood friends. but I was essentially.
Can you guys hear Brock? Is that just me?
No, no, I
Frozen.
think he's
Nope.
gone.
Okay, he froze. All right, Brock, we'll circle back. It happens.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. You there, Brock?
No, it seems to have frozen there.
Seems to have frozen. Okay. So I'll take him out
Wait,
for just
are
a
you
second.
still there?
There you are. There's Brock.
Yeah,
You there?
sorry, I shut down some other applications.
It's okay.
Sorry about that. But now this is giving me anxiety. Anyway,
We
yeah,
embrace
so-
humanity here.
Yeah,
It's okay.
right. And so my parents tried everything they could to figure out why I had anxiety, why I had panic disorders, why I was depressed as a child, why I had tantrums that seemingly came out of nowhere. I give them a lot of credit, but there was no. I grew up rural, so there wasn't a ton of opportunities in a town of 5 to 7,000 people in western Minnesota. So, we did what we could with the information that we had at the time. But for me, like once I grew into adulthood, and by the way, I had all of those too. I wrote down all of these symptoms or these diagnoses. I have ADHD, depression, anxiety, panic disorder, apraxia. I can't even get the dyspraxia right because I can't think of the word to say. And then a lot of that actually led into depression, which led into substance abuse as well. And so that was
was it because of the not understanding, or was it because of not treatment? What do you think led to that?
Yeah, I think that was like I could never find the missing puzzle piece. I like a lot of you see you're nodding your heads. Hundreds of doctor visits. I had my brain scanned, MRI brain scans. I had EEGs, EKGs. I plugged up to as many pieces of equipment to figure that out. I even got frustrated when I'd come back and I'd get no results. I mean, to the point where like I want you to tell me what's wrong with me, and yet they would say nothing's wrong with you, and it would make me more frustrated because I know we couldn't quite figure it out.
It's like, okay, either I'm crazy or you're wrong.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
Yeah, you're wrong here.
Yeah, and I think that with like Kate was talking about, she's got some the physical like evidence of that. I don't have the evidence, and so you have to either believe me what I'm saying here or not. Now, I did get the evidence for me was in the infertility and the blood type. That was finally that missing puzzle piece that I got. I could put it together. But then it was like, what do I do with this information? That's what, kind of I evolved from there.
And those resources are so important, like Rick was talking about. That's so very important. So, Stephen, I want to ask you. So, you were growing up and you were doing all this cool stuff with, martial arts and all this fun, cool stuff that you had going on. Were there any things that about your chromodiversity that made that difficult? Was it something that you think helped? Maybe how did that kind of go for you?
No, it didn't help at all. I've never. The reason I chose martial arts is I've never, and you guys can probably agree, I don't have much ball sense. Soccer balls, tennis ball, I coordination is not the same. But the one thing that I learned to master was table tennis. You think, well, that small little white ball, I managed to get that right. I listen to you guys. It sounds awesome. All these things we have the ADD, ADHD. I think I have also the autism spectrum, sort of bordering with that. In all my years in sales, I could never be in a room where there were 10 people all speaking at the same time. I had to be in my own space. Nowadays, they have these partitions. They have one floor and they have everybody speaking, and it's too much noise. There's way too much noise for me.
I agree.
Yes.
I found that, I had all the similar things that you guys had. When I was younger, I knew there was something amiss. There was something wrong. And I was comparing to a brother who was very good at soccer, who was very good at all ball sports, and just very good he just managed to even talk. I didn't quite know how to talk. I don't want to sound like a complete simpleton here. And every time you try to get something out of your mouth, it became frustrating because people get frustrated and you're not talking quick enough. And so you'd be pushed aside. And I found that affected me a lot when I was a kid. The thing
Outside of, I'm sorry, real quick, I wanted to ask you a question on that. So outside of just the obvious trauma of being pushed aside and made to feel not included, did that have any other effects, that being pushed aside? Did it slow down education? Did it keep you from, trying things that maybe you would have tried? What other effects did that have?
No, very much so. You know what? At school, I did terrible at school. I never got the gist of any of the subjects. And I don't know if it's because of short-term memory that I couldn't recall that information. And I kept failing, and none of the teachers actually picked that up. They just, in the times that we grew up in school, I'm 65 now. I grew up in the 70s and doing school, and teachers just put you down to being stupid or lazy because you've got a class of 30, 40 people, kids. Teachers can't focus on that one child. So they would just put it down to you're not interested. And so I would repeat the grade and do it again. I believe I was eventually pushed through school because I would have been the oldest student, probably 30 years, and still been at school.
So, oh my gosh.
But so they eventually pushed me through. I wanted to do, my thing was I wanted to study medicine. And my marks were just not good enough. So I dropped out of school and I went into a trade, and I went and qualified as a printer, which I hated. So this having this extra chromosome is, and I try and tell people, it's not just that one little chromosome. It has a whole effect on everything, on your learning, on your language, on the way you speak, on the way you listen to information coming in, how information goes out, it doesn't go out correctly. There are so many different factors about Klinefelter's and the other syndromes that you guys have as well. I just want to bring up, at 65 now, I know you girls are probably going to think it's quite funny, that here I am as in a male body, and I'm having menopause. I have hot sweat. I have hot flashes.
I feel your pain. I feel your pain, Stephen. I do.
So
I'm having it.
I wake up in the middle of the night and I just take off all my clothes. I just want to walk outside with no clothes on.
Yep. Oh yeah. I literally, this poor, I'm sitting here next to the woman who's traveling with me, and like this poor woman's just been subject to so much nudity because I can't stand anything being on my body. Like I'm like, get off! It's so hot. I can't stand it. So I feel your pain.
Good luck to you guys as you get older. This is something to look forward to. No, kidding.
Oh no, I'm right there with you.
It's tragic, but you know what, though, Stephen, I think it gives you some great empathy to understand more about other humans, that most men never get an opportunity to understand what that feels like, what that how that can change your mood, your diet, everything, your energy, everything else. So kind of my last question for all of you, and I'm going to kind of go in order, is talking about, and I just kind of want to know just a quick, just ideas when you're thinking about talking to people with children that are going and maybe realizing maybe something's not quite right. What are some things that you would give them, some things that you'd say to them as advice? And actually, Elliot, I'm going to start with you and then we'll go around. Oh, I think Elliot's still muted. There he goes.
Right. Well, advice for parents is the very first thing is that when parents get a diagnosis, it actually can be quite traumatizing. They want the best for their children, obviously, and hearing that there might be a genetic difference historically has been associated to rare diseases and terrible diseases, while actually it was often not diagnosed, that there were very common differences. And so the first thing that I'd say to parents is that's a really, really good thing that you've got a diagnosis, because early diagnosis is the single biggest predictor of positive lifelong outcomes. It's the single biggest predictor of positive lifelong outcomes in terms of health, because you can take preventive measures about the types of risks that you might have. They might be bone density risks, they might be neurodiversity risks, there are all sorts of health risks. You can actually have a much better prevention that can take place. Secondly, as
Absolutely.
a parent, you can also have a much better life, because if you focus on the strengths first of your children, and there are strengths associated to these differences, and every individual has their own strengths, you are likely to have much better outcomes, both for your child growing up, but also for you as a parent. Third
Right.
thing
Steer
is,
into the curve,
I would
right?
say,
Don't
get
fight it.
informed.
Steer into the curve.
Absolutely. And the third thing is, and I'll let you guys then go, but the third thing is be informed with the right kind of information, because a lot of the information that you will see on the internet, and that's the first thing I did was Google it, is still today is a lot of it, there are a lot of misconceptions, a lot of it is outdated. Many doctors are not aware of the latest understanding of these differences, and it can be really scary. Also,
Absolutely.
looks like that everybody might have everything, all that's listed on, it's a bit like an aspirin label of the side effects. You have,
Yeah.
potential terrible side effects, like you never take aspirin. Yes. Well, so I'd say it's a wonderful thing that you've got this diagnosis. I understand it might be difficult you're going to have to absorb a lot of information, find good information sources. Stephen Malherbe
Yes.
has a wonderful website, great information source for XXY, and he might want to share what that is. Kate can refer you to another very good resource, and Chromodiversity podcast that we're doing. I'm reading out research. Some of it is for clinicians, some of it is for families. That's a good resource. You have to find the right resources.
Yes, and make sure and check your sources and make sure that your doctor actually knows what they're talking about, that they're a specialist, so on and so forth. So, Brock, let's go to you. What is your quick fire advice for some parents that have kids that are experiencing differences?
Yeah, totally. What I think, the biggest thing I've learned in life, that my extra X chromosome, as well as all the other comorbidities and the challenges that I've had to face, is knowing what's in your control and what's out of your control, and being okay with that. And I want to emphasize that we all have the ability to react. Everyone in this world has the ability to react, but to respond is a separate thing. And so the ability to, someone once told me the only thing we can control in this life is how we respond to the events that happen to us. And
oh, that's a good quote.
Yeah, and I take that as a kind of a daily mantra for me in managing my life and overcoming obstacles. But to respond, I need to be informed. And to Elliot's point, to make sure that you're identifying the sources, that you're backing up those sources too. Some of them may come from very reputable sources. I had my own experience with my doctor, my family doctor of 10 years. I had to inform him of the diagnosis. I had to tell him what it was. I had to explain it, which was interesting and also a little bit frustrating. But also the ability to say, okay, well, there are definitely more opportunities for me to explore this, and then figure out the path that works best for me, and then do the same thing if I was a parent. The path that works best for my child, and to know that not everything on that list might not match up. For instance, I'm not super tall. I saw that's one of the things, like, oh, I'm not super tall, so why didn't I get that? But I did get the youthful look at least, so I got that. Good. But yeah, but right. So you're right. Not everything that shows up on these lists of symptoms and diagnosis will apply, but you can have a plan if they do apply.
Right. Absolutely. Plan is crucial. And I did want to touch on, again, when your doctor does not know about your diagnosis, that's okay. That may not be their specialty, but make sure that you have a doctor that bothers to look it up and understand how it's going to affect the rest of your health, because it does. Kate, I'm going to have you go next. What are your tips?
Well, my first tip for any parent of a child with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is pull them out of gymnastics class if they're in it. I had partial joint dislocation, sprains, strains, everything.
What about yoga? Is that okay for?
Not really. You have to be very
Okay.
controlled because you can do very flexible poses, but then you pay for it the next day. And it's very easy for your connective tissue to stretch, but your joints not be able to handle it. Like I said, we don't break, we bend, but the bending really hurts. It really hurts.
I just got a mental image. I'm so sorry. I just got a mental image of like when I was little and my Gumby, and I would bend him, but then he would get stuck that way, and he looked so sad. And I know that's like, but in my mind, so it actually can create pain when you hyperextend, and does it sometimes go on for periods of time?
Oh yes, I am in bed most mornings for quite a while before I can even get up. And yesterday I did 4 things. I picked up my son, I went to go vote, I had a phone call, and then I went to wind ensemble rehearsal. I had to leave wind ensemble halfway through, partly because I was sweating, and partly because the noise, and partly because I was just in so much pain. And I woke up this morning and all I could think was, I can't do this panel, but luckily I have good meds and was able to stretch gently. So I was able to be here. Now, the other piece of information I would give parents is, of course, be educated as much as you can. The best source that I have found is ehlersdanlos.com, and I'll spell it EHLERS-DANLOS. That's the Ehlers-Danlos National Foundation. Their information is great. They have printouts that you can bring to doctors' offices and dentist offices to help educate them. But the biggest thing is believe your kid. And
Yes.
I can't tell when my son is really hurting or if he's trying to get out of taking the garbage, but he's probably really hurting. So I'm going to go with that. I was humiliated by disbelief growing up. When I was in high school, I'm a musician. I'm a professional horn player, and I teach all brass and woodwinds to mostly beginners and neurodiverse students. And when I was 16, my band director, who teased me mercilessly about getting hurt. I did sprain my ankle in gym class playing ping pong. Don't ask me how, it just happened. He gave me an award at the band banquet. They were giving out best musician, most improved, all of that. I got an index card with a bandage on it that said Band-Aid.
Oh.
Yet I was the only person in the state of Connecticut to make all state on orchestra and in choir. So it was humiliating. I got teased. I was told I had Munchausen syndrome. What's the other one? Hypochondria, that I was faking to get out of classes or work or whatever. My husband went to enough of these appointments where enough doctors told me that I was faking it, that he's now my ex-husband. And I lost pretty much everything, and I'm rebuilding as best I can, starting over at 50. But my son gets validation from me every single day. When he says, I hurt, I say, yeah, I know. What can we do? Instead of, oh, you're fine. Go empty the dishwasher. No, because it really hurts to do. So if you have a child who is saying something, even no matter what, you need to believe them, because otherwise they grow up with this kind of backwards imposter syndrome, and it lasts through therapy, hopefully not all the way through, but it can really color your entire life, and the color is not pretty.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yes, believe your kid, listen to them. Steer into the curve, right? Just like go with the direction of everything else. It's much safer, and it has much more positive outcomes, to use Elliot's terminology. So Stephen, I wanted to also specifically ask you, so, your advice to parents, but I also want to specify what are some of your advice to parents who are also having kids that have differences with learning and things like that, and what are some extra things that you would tack on for that?
Sure. when parents come to me and they tell me that their kids because I run an awareness in South Africa, and I do road trips and these type of things, and I try and tell parents, you must teach your kids no different. You know what? They can pretty much do anything out there. Too often, parents think, well, because my son has got an extra X one, who's got a problem with some type of syndrome, immediately they seem to put the brakes on and say, you know what, they become too overprotective. And I think that you must let your kid go out there and do whatever they need to do. On a learning thing, I read a lot of books, and that's my way of getting information in, if that makes any sense. To offer advice for parents out there, I think Elliot says, I think a lot of this misinformation on Google, and that's an area I try and tell parents not to go there. Initially, yes. And the other thing I'd like to see I'd love to see change with, and I'm talking about Klinefelter syndrome specifically, is doctors' journals haven't changed in 50 years. So you've got about that much information about Klinefelter syndrome, and in there they mention that your kid's got a below average IQ, and so that doctor puts that out to the parent, has got no idea. He doesn't do any more research, or he tells you as the parent to go out and read more information.
Yes.
So I would love to see going forward in the future, I don't know how, when Elliot and I spoke about it, to try and change those doctors' information. Yes. Nothing has changed in all those years.
The education needs to change for medical professionals and mental health professionals.
It's education. You know what? We might be slow and we may not grasp everything at first, and we don't hear things all the time. It doesn't make us stupid. We're just a little bit slower on these things. But unfortunately, too much is written about our conditions, and people kind of see us as being maybe backward. We don't fit into the norm, and it's to try and change that.
There's a reason, if I may add to that, there's a reason why I believe this is really urgent. While most people were not diagnosed in the past, there's the changes in technology with what's called non-invasive prenatal testing, which means you can take a blood test from the mother, and that can give you an indication if there are certain chromosomal and genetic differences. Means that in the next 5 years, it's likely that we'll have 5 to 10 more, 5 to 10-fold more diagnosis. Yeah. So that means in the United States alone, hundreds of thousands of people. Now, if doctors, your GP and doctors and educators and parents don't have any pre-existing awareness or outdated misconceptions about it, there's hundreds of thousands of people just in the United States, many millions of people around the world, where many easy wins could have been made at an early age will not be made. And we don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And the education, it has to change. It has to get better. It's the same thing with all different types of diversities, even medical conditions. It's just gotten ridiculous. I love that you guys brought that up. Thank you.
And this is also, it could not be done as well in the past because the genetic testing was simply not as universal or not as easy. And if you look at Rick here, Rick has an extra Y chromosome. Now, this is extraordinarily rare that you'll ever see somebody knowingly with an extra Y chromosome. Here's why. Well, it's actually quite common. 1 out of 1,000 men have an extra Y chromosome, it's thought. So you've probably already met someone with an extra Y chromosome before this panel, but only 1 out of 100 are ever diagnosed with it. Rick is the exception, not the rule. That means 1 out of 100,000 people, men, are identified with an extra Y. So it's as if doctors never see it, but it's very common. And yeah,
it's
Rick
fascinating.
what he has is common, relatively, but it's very rare that you'll ever see someone knowingly with an extra Y, an extra X, a little bit less rare, but still quite rare.
That's so interesting. So Rick,
Yeah.
so you're our last one, and then we're going to wrap up. So, but I wanted to kind of get yours to be a little bit more specific too. So, one of the things that I've come to find very fascinating is that when people have specifically ADHD, that the way that they communicate can sometimes frustrate other people, because it's a lot, like you kind of go through the whole thought process with them, but it's also genius, and it comes with some kind of cool benefits when you get to go through that journey with someone. So I was wondering, could you talk to us a little bit about what you would say to parents with ADHD children in terms of communicating with them, and also with autism too, because there's some similar kind of things there.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the biggest fears for parents who have their children are diagnosed with chromodiversity or some kind of learning difficulty or whatever it happens to be is, first of all, it's how they communicate, yes, and it's also how they're going to continue communicating, how they're going to develop, what they're going to be at the end of the day, how they're going to become adults. Will they be able to look after themselves? Will they be able to get a job? I mean, the stats around autism alone are something like 20% of autistic adults have a job. It varies from country to country, but I think that might be the figure globally, roughly, which is awful. I mean,
It is, and it's so unnecessary.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that parents have to do in these kind of situations is they have to be creative. They have to try lots of things. They have to be all in, which ultimately is what parents should be, but it isn't always
right. Like, isn't that kind of your job as a parent to be all in?
And because we've got responsibilities and stress, and I'm a parent myself. I know that sometimes my son will frustrate me, and it's not always, you're not always going to be your best self with them, but it's really important to try and keep in mind to be trying lots of different things. And Elliot told me a really interesting story about his son, about how it took such a long time to find the things that he was good at. But if you keep searching for those things, even if it's just like you're doing one thing and they're good at one thing out of 10 things that you do in that thing, if you can latch onto those little things. And then, I don't know if you've ever done, there's like an idea generation exercise where you take different strengths and combine them together to look for careers that can combine those different things. You can do that as they're growing up, so that they also start to instill belief in their abilities, the fact that they aren't, okay, maybe they suck at the things that other people or the popular crowd or whatever are good at, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have any strengths. I mean, I think it's part of one of the reasons why they've got rid of the whole term as Asperger's, because that used to be a kind of high functioning autistic person.
Right. Yeah.
There are, whereas a non-verbal autistic person couldn't possibly be high functioning, and that's now seen to no longer be the case. That people who are non-verbal can be very high functioning in terms
absolutely.
of their abilities, their skills, what they can achieve in life. So but going back to the communication question, I suppose it's I mean, like every child, the game changes constantly. You think something works, and then a week or two later it's not working. So maybe having autism or ADHD will keep you on your toes more, and you'll get more frustrated because you won't find things. You'll find less things work, but then I don't know, how bad do you want it? It's you got to be creative. You got to keep trying different things, and some things will work and others won't. But I think that goes for, I think that goes for all kids as well. It's just that there are certain things that are easier to define with maybe a more neurotypical child. That's all. Yeah, that's my
That's
take.
fascinating. No, that was great. Thank you. And I do want to just say, one of the best things I ever learned, and I was taught this lesson in a professional setting, but it applies to everything, and I've used it with children that I'm around, is let them tell you what they need. Communicate with them. Let them tell you. Let them help pick the tools. Let them do these things, because that will actually help in their journey. It will help them to feel confident, and it will help to make sure that you find the right solutions. And with that, I want to thank everybody for participating, everybody for watching, for joining. Please connect to all of these wonderful humans on LinkedIn. Please join our journey with My XXY. It's absolutely extraordinary and wonderful. All of these humans are incredible, and they will connect to you. They will talk to you. They will help you find resources, anything that you need. And there's many, many more wonderful ambassadors in the movement as well. Stay tuned for other wonderful events. Elliot, real quick, what are some upcoming events that people can tune into?
Well, real quick, Rick Clark has already done a podcast. It's two parts, and you can listen to it on chromodiversity.com. It's great. It's been downloaded more than any other podcast we've ever done. Coming up with Stephen next week on Tuesday, podcast, and in 2 parts next week, the following week. Brock then comes up. You can hear their stories. We haven't had time to really hear their stories of growing up, which are captivating. Stephen's actually written a book about that. And Kate will also then come up. So that's coming up. We also, in 2 weeks, another live panel. And then in 3 weeks, we'll start panels about myth busting, about common genetic differences.
Oh, those are always my favorite. I love the myth busting ones. Thank you so very much, Elliot. Thank you, everyone, again for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for being here and joining in with us. And happy Chromodiversity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.